I'm here to hopefully inspire you all about this new digital society that we're going to build, and my belief that we need to build this on self-sovereign identity. So what exactly is self-sovereign identity, and why do I believe this is the case? I wanted to start by just giving you a little bit of a background into who I am. So I spent about 21 years building AI systems at IBM Research. I joined Accenture earlier this year. So in the opening talk today, you saw a talk about how the great AI that was happening in the 2000s and in the 2010s. So that was when I was kind of working on AI. And during that time, I became increasingly interested in two key things. One is the ethics of data science, the ethics of AI. So what kind of society are we going to be building when data and AI is built into the fabric of everything? And the second thing is, AI is only as good as the data that feeds it. So how are we going to build a digital society on a data ecosystem that is equitable, that is privacy preserving? And this is what got me interested in this whole idea of self-sovereign identity. So with that said, let's get started. So what do we see as this future digital society? Well, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We see this as being something that's going to deliver these frictionless user experiences that span the physical-digital divide. And by that I mean is that when I go into a shop and I look at a product, I should be able to, maybe scan the QR code with my phone and be able to access additional information about that product. I might be, for example, buying something in a pharmacy, and I want to check to see if I'm allergic to it. Or I might be buying something in a grocery store and I want to check to see if I'm allergic to it. So I want to be able to leverage data about myself that's maybe on my device and use that to inform whether or not this is the product I want to buy. So this idea of integrating digital data with physical experiences together, this is also where we see things like augmented reality and ultimately virtual reality also playing a role in the future. The second thing is that this ability to bring together physical and digital experiences is going to transform how we interact with each other. And we're already seeing that anyway with social media, but also how we interact with the world. And this is also going to mean that we're going to be expecting these kind of personalized and automated experiences that are going to be powered by AI. So all of this means data. This future is going to be powered by data. Now, what this means is we really, really need to be thinking about what is going to happen with everybody's personal data as it's flowing around the place. What we believe that we need to empower individuals with choice and control over their personal data, who they want to share it with, what they want done with it. We also believe that we need to start to instill trust in these interactions, these data exchanges, trust on both sides. So me as a user, if I'm, just one quick aside, so travel as an example, so we've been working with the travel sector, and something like 10% of all the money spent in the travel sector is fraudulent, is fraud. It's massive, billions. So imagine I'm going to a website and I want to buy a holiday, I want to book into a hotel or something. I want to trust that the website that I'm interacting with is legitimate. I want to trust that the holiday I'm buying with is indeed a legitimate holiday. So I need to have trust with the entities, the organizations that I'm interacting with. Similarly, the organizations need to have trust in me. Am I the person I say I am? So this trust has to be both ways. And this is one of the interesting characteristics of a self-sovereign identity network. It allows this trust to be built into everything that we do. We also want to be able to keep users safe. I don't talk about privacy because privacy is very much kind of a personal choice. Some people care about privacy, some people don't. I think what everybody cares about is safety. So it's not about whether or not somebody has access to my data, but it's what they're doing with it. Is the data getting into the hands of bad actors? So safety is the fundamental thing. And what we want to make sure is that users feel safe, that their data is protected and it doesn't get into the hands of bad actors and it doesn't leak where it's not supposed to leak. Now, why this is particularly important in a digital society is if we think about today, we go onto a website, we log on, we share some data. But just imagine in a physical digital world where when we walk into a building, we might be getting access by scanning our smartphone or our smartwatch. We might be, when we're buying products at the shopping till, we might have to prove we're over 21 to buy alcohol, or we might be proving that we have a loyalty card so we can get points. Everything we do is going to be exchanging digital, is going to have a digital footprint, it's going to be exchanging data. So this idea of data leakage is going to become a really, really big problem. And self-sovereign identity has a very, very nice way of addressing the issue of data leakage. Also, also goes on the other side. So a lot of organizations we speak with, they're really concerned about the volume and the amount of personal data that they have to store, because there's also a risk for them. The last thing any company wants is to have a data breach where their customers' personal data is leaking out to bad actors. So also the ability to minimize the amount of data that organizations need to hold is also another key factor to consider. And final, to level the playing field, to power innovation. If we think about data today, a lot of the data, in fact, I would argue by far a large majority of the data about us is held in data silos that's managed by large corporations. We don't have access to the data. We don't have any utility over the data. And it also means that smaller companies in a data-driven, AI-driven world, the smaller companies are at a disadvantage because they don't get access to the same data that the big guys have. So we also need to be thinking about how do we build a digital society that is equitable, both in terms of individuals, but also organization. So these are some of the things that we think about when we think about building a digital society into the future. So even though I'm talking self-sovereign identity, what you're going to hear for the rest of the presentation is me talking more about data in a general sense. Identity is absolutely critical. It's basic table stakes. If I'm renting a car from Avis or Hertz or somebody, they obviously need to know who I am. And they need to know that I've got a driving license. And they need to have this other information about me. So identity is important, but it's only a small part of the data that exchanges when I make an interaction or a transaction. So we're thinking about data more broadly. And we're also thinking about this concept of technical, business, and societal transformation. How a business process is going to change in an AI-powered, data-driven world. So we believe that digital identity needs to change. So what is self-sovereign or decentralized identity, and why do we believe that this is going to be fundamental to this future? So if we just think about the three different types of identity, we have centralized, so this we're familiar with. This is where organization establishes and manages identity for its own use. So your employer gives you an ID, so you can access their system. So that's central. Decentralized is the idea that an organization will establish and manage identity for use by multiple organizations. So this is like your social login example. In both of these cases, these organizations are absolutely managing and controlling the data. Because even if it's used by multiple organizations, those organizations need to connect to this identity provider. So the third type is the decentralized. And what decentralized does is where an organization establishes and manages identity, or indeed any data, for the use by the data subject. And what that means is, somebody once said to me, why is Accenture interested in decentralized identity? Isn't this anarchy? Like, it's going to be all over the place. It's going to be a mess. No, it's not. What decentralization is fundamentally about is the use of data, not the issuing of data. There's still going to be data issues. There's going to be governments that are issuing government IDs. There's employers that are going to be issuing employment IDs. The fundamental difference is how can that data be used? Is what agency does the data subject have over that data? So if, for example, my employer issues me a proof of employment, so Accenture issues me a credential saying I'm an Accenture employee, I can then use that credential to get a check mark maybe on my LinkedIn profile, or I can use it to get a discount for companies that Accenture has a relationship because I can prove that I'm an Accenture employee. I can use it to get access to one of my customers that because they know I'm an Accenture employee, I can use my credential to get access. I can control where and when and with whom I share that data in a decentralized fashion. And that's what's very, very interesting about this model because it gives an individual agency, and it also allows data to be released for use in many, many different ways. So how does this work in practical terms? So the idea is that the data corp issues a verifiable credential to Jane's wallet. And after that, they're not involved in any data exchange. So let's use the DMV, the drivers, the organization that issues driver's license. Instead of issuing me a physical driver's license card, they're going to issue me a digital driver's license that's cryptographically signed by them. And that's going to be sitting in my wallet. So then once I've requested the data and I get that in my wallet, I can then share that, all or part of that data, with Service Inc. So Service Inc., let's use the Hertz example. So Service Inc. is Hertz. I want to be able to rent a car from them. All they need to know is they need to know that I have a valid driving license, that I have a valid credit card, so that I can pay for the car. And I'm insured potentially if they're going to allow third-party insurance. So I can then share that data directly with Service Inc., Hertz in this case. Hertz do not have to go back to Data Corp. They do not have to integrate with Data Corp. This is a very, very flexible way for me to share data with a third party. Now, the question you'll ask is, that's kind of the way the world works today. The difference is that in the world today, if I have my driving license, it's a physical piece of paper or a card, I'm self-attesting this is my driver's license. The service provider isn't going to trust me. What they're going to do is they're going to enter the information into the system. They're going to call the API of the DMV or the driver's license, and they're going to confirm that it is indeed, based on the information provided, this is indeed a valid driving license. So that they're not going to actually trust me. And the difference in this world is they can trust me without going back to Data Corp. Now, how do they trust me? Why? So this is where the trust network is so important. So what basically the trust network is, for those familiar with PKDs, you can think about it as a network of PKDs. I mean, it's obviously more than that, but it's essentially a set of keys. What happens is Service Inc. is going to see the credential. They're going to see the issuer is the DMV. They're going to see the DID, the decentralized identifier of the issuer. And is this a valid DID? And is this the DID that belongs to the DMV? They're going to go check the trust registry, and the trust registry is going to confirm this is a valid DID, this is the DID belonging to X, and this is a DID you can trust. And then you're going to be able to retrieve the public key. But now you can do the cryptographic verification of the data that's been exchanged to you. The thing that's attractive here is that the trust network doesn't hold any PII. What the trust network does is it validates, verifies, authenticates the issuers and the verifiers within the network, and it provides the cryptographic material needed to verify credentials. But the actual PII, the personal data, doesn't actually need to be stored in a centralized system. It resides with the Data Corp, which was the issuer, the way it always resides, and it now resides with Jane in her wallet. So this is kind of the interesting aspect. There's one other thing I would say is how the data is exchanged. The data is exchanged in proof exchange, which means that ultimately there's a mechanism by which you can share part of the information. You don't have to necessarily share all of the credentials. So it's also a way to have privacy-preserving data exchange. This is another slight variation. We're seeing this idea of verifiable credentials also referring to company, because it's not just people that care about privacy and care about protecting their data. Companies care about protecting their data as well. So this analogy of verifiable credentials and verified data and having a digital wallet, this applies both to personal wallets, and it's also the same for corporate wallet. And we believe that this can revolutionize how data is exchanged. And there's a whole slew of use cases that you can actually realize in this digital exchange mechanism. And the other thing that's attractive is these credentials can be used both in the physical and the digital world. So you can use your proof of employment credential to log onto your company's website, because it's an access token, the same as it's a token, the same as any other token in authentication. So you can access it, use it to access your company's digital properties, but you can also use it to access a physical site. You know, scan a QR code, scan your watch to a card reader, and you can use it to get into physical buildings as well. So it serves both as a bridge between the physical and the digital world. And again, we're seeing this both for personal wallets, and we're seeing this also for organizational wallets. So why is this so important? we can talk about is clearly important because of privacy preservation. But I want to talk more broadly about a slightly separate reason why I think this is fundamental. And this is the idea that in the future, we need a more equitable data economy. We don't always like talking about data as though it's a currency, as though it's money, but that's the reality of it. It's money today. People pay for products and services with their data. They don't know that they're doing that, but that's effectively what they're doing. Companies buy your data from third parties. And the problem today is that the data economy, the data ecosystem, the data now is not equitable. So this is the reason why we believe that we need to build a new data economy that is equitable. And what does that mean? There's 6 key characteristics of an equitable data economy. The first one is it empowers individuals. And this is what I've spoken about already, this idea that it gives individuals agency over their data and it maximizes its utility. This is the critical component. It's about maximizing the utility of your data. I'll give you a simple example. Utility companies, we've been talking with utility companies and telcos. They have a whole lot of really valuable information about you, their customer. And they generate that data as part of their ability to give you a service. But a lot of that data could be really valuable to you for other purposes. So, for example, they generate your scores to say how good you are paying your bills. And that's based on historically how good you are paying the bills. Do you pay them on time? So that really tells a lot about you and your ability to manage your finances. Now, just imagine that they issued that to you as a verifiable credential you can hold in your wallet. You can now use that potentially if you wanted to rent an apartment to prove my utility company these 3 utility companies I use can prove to you I always pay my bills on time, or I want to get a loan. So that's just one example of data that exists today that I don't have access to and I don't have utility over. So just imagine a world where I could actually get utility from all the data that is being generated about me. Data is not the enemy. The issue is how data is used. But data can be hugely powerful if it's in the right hands. And I would argue the right hands are yours when it's your personal data. But back to the other side, level the playing field. This is also really, really important for companies. So just imagine I'm a small company in Italy or Spain or Slovakia. And I want to basically grow my business into a global marketplace. Nobody knows me outside of Slovakia. But just imagine that the Slovakian government or Slovakian banks or a Slovakian service was issuing verifiable credentials to the Slovakian business. It might be a credential to prove you are who you say you are. Your business, you're based in Slovakia, something about you as a company. It might be an ESG credential. That maybe they've certified your supply chain, how green or how sustainable your supply chain is. You might be able to get a credential. Now you have the ability with, say, something like a matching engine. Then if a US company, as one example, they want to diversify their supply chain, they don't know you, but you can prove through verifiable credentials that you are who you say you are sustainable, and there could be a whole slew of other data elements about you, the company. So what this does is it allows smaller companies to participate both in the data economy, but in the physical economy as well. So today, getting into a supply chain can be really, really expensive. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of manual verification that has to happen. It's very, very expensive for a small company. Whereas this is a way to be, again, more equitable, to allow smaller companies as well as bigger companies, leverage data to take part in the broader economy. Removing barriers. This is related to this. Removing barriers. Sometimes there's barriers to entry because it's maybe too expensive or too complex to join somebody else's supply chain. Increasing trust. Again, today there's a lot of manual checking that happens. When you open a bank account, you have to send them 50 different pieces of paper. 2 weeks later, they've eventually manually verified that. It takes time, it's expensive, it's really cumbersome for users. Having verifiable data tied to verifiable identities significantly increases trust and it makes business processes work faster. It also reduces fraud because you can't pretend you are somebody you're not. This is going to be particularly important as we see with the IDAS, the EU regulation. That's going to be coming in fairly soon. We're already seeing countries starting to build their their citizens' wallets. They're starting to prepare to issue identities. Once everybody has these digital wallets in their hands, it allows me to absolutely verify I am who I say I am for a set of business processes. So it would reduce fraud. And the other part of it is fostering ethical AI. If I am actively participating in the process of exchanging data with companies, and they need to tell me why they're asking for that data, that itself adds transparency. And with transparency, as they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. With transparency, it's a lot harder to be unethical. So this will also help foster trust in kind of AI and some of these data services. There's also an economic dimension, hence why we call it the data economy. So value flows, and this is why we call it the value diamond. Value flows from the issuer who has the data about you to the holder that is essentially the data subject, be that a person or an organization. And then you in turn can share that data with a third party. So that's how the value flows. But there's also economic flow, because the verifier, which is the consumer of the data, today they normally pay the issuer directly for data. They buy your data from a third party. This way the data can also flow. So it could even potentially flow back to the holder. You can also have, for example, issuers revenue flowing to the tech providers who provide the infrastructure. And then you can also have, potentially, you might even have data flowing from the holder to the issuer. So we pay for our passport today, we pay for a driving license, and companies will definitely be willing to pay for credentials about their business. So there can also be a revenue opportunity there. So this is a really exciting new economic opportunity if we can get this right. So how is it being applied? There's many, many different use cases. I'm only going to talk about 2 specific examples, but these are just some of the different ways you can think about verifiable credentials and decentralized identity being used to help modernize and reinvent business. So the 2 that I wanted to talk about was, one, I was going to talk about the worker. The reason I want to talk about the worker is most of us between 60 and 60 were workers. So this is relevant to everybody in this room. And the other reason is that it's a use case that is fundamentally, the work environment is changing. We all know that, between AI and between the gig economy. The workforce is changing. The processes by which companies manage their workforce is changing. So this is a really, really good opportunity for us to reimagine the future of workplace in a way that is equitable and that benefits everybody, both employee and employer. And the second use case I'm going to focus on is the organization, is the supply chain. Again, the equitable aspects of letting every company participate in the supply chain. So there's 3 key themes, and there's probably many more, but there's 3 key things that are interesting from the perspective of verifiable credentials. One is the rise of the fluid economy. I spent 21 years, nearly 20 years at IBM. I guarantee you the next generation will not be spending 20 years at any one company. People are moving more rapidly between companies, and they're moving very, very rapidly. And what this is doing is this is putting huge pressure on organizations trying to manage their workforce. If you've got a really expensive process of onboarding employees, which is time consuming, it takes you 2 weeks, because I joined Accenture in February, it took 2 or 3 weeks to verify my data. If you have workforce turning around on a monthly basis, it takes you 2 weeks to verify, and then 2 weeks later, it doesn't make sense. So we need a way of helping people onboard and join organizations, so that the fluid of the workforce is critical. Skills being the new currency. So this is the other really interesting aspect. What does it mean to have skills? But what it is skills are something we want to bring with ourselves. We're finding today there's a big challenge. A lot of people, they gain skills, they do training, they get accreditation in a specific company. When they leave the company, that credential disappears because it's not Marie's credential. It's Marie's when she was in Accenture, Marie's when she was in IBM. So what we need is a mechanism where I can bring all my experience with me. And also, my skills and experience may not be just educational, it may be on the work, on the job experience. So say, for example, if I'm working in Accenture and I work on a really exciting financial services project, I want to be able to get that credentialized so I can prove I spent the last 6 months working on a financial services project. Accenture doesn't want to obviously disclose any personal information about the company or the client or whatever, but you can issue a credential to prove that this employee worked on a project for this amount of time and demonstrated these skills. So now all of a sudden, I as a worker am building a catalogue of skills, which is where the future is going. That's a currency that I can use both within my company. When I go to my next client, I'm looking for my next project, I can demonstrate this whole set of skills I have. But because it's decentralized, because it's tied to me, Marie Wallace, in my wallet, I can share experiences I have outside of the company. So this is really important as we build our catalogs of skills into the future. And the third thing is about HR being transformed by AI. In order to do good AI, you need good data. If I want to basically do skills matching to find the best people to work on the best projects, I need lots of really, really good data points in order to make a good recommendation. So we need to be collecting more data. We need to be leveraging that to get the benefit. And it's not just for companies, but also me, an employee. If I'm looking for my next job, just imagine if I had access to an AI or recommendation engine that would help me find the best jobs based on my set of skills. So this goes two ways. And with that said, that's why within Accenture, we're doing this for our own company. We're issuing verifiable credentials to prove a whole set of things about our employees. But we're also working with our clients. We're working with third parties to be able to release things like, my certifications I've done, the awards I won, the university degrees I've got. So this allows me to start to build, and we're finding that this is a really valuable use case for employers and one which they're very, very interested in adopting. So this is why I think the work, and one of the quick things I would say about the worker, this is just one example. There's so many use cases about workers because workers have to travel. So we have some of our clients looking at, right to work, looking at visa processing. Our workers have healthcare. So, so there's a whole slew of interesting use cases around the work. So the other example is about the organizations. Supply chains are not resilient. This is no surprise to anybody after COVID. We all know how non-resilient we are. 79% of companies say they do not have a highly resilient supply chain. We need to make our supply chains more resilient. We need to make them more diverse. We need to make it easy for us to add entities that we trust into our supply chain and take entities we don't trust out of our supply chain. So the other thing that's really nice about verifiable credential, it's not a one and done exercise. I equate self-sovereign identity to data the same way streaming was to music. In the old world, we used to buy CDs. You had a stack, anybody old enough to remember, you had a stack of CDs in your sitting room. You'd buy a CD and then you take it out when you wanted to listen to music. Now you don't do that. Now you stream on demand. If you want to listen to a particular song, you just listen to the song and you don't have to buy the whole CD. So it's a similar example with self-sovereign identity. So it's not one and done. So I onboard into a supply chain and I onboard based on my sustainability credential. It's one of the key things because this company wants a sustainable supply chain. The company that's managing the supply chain can dynamically check at any punch time, can query my wallet to say, is your sustainability certification still valid or have you lost it? So it allows you to dynamically verify and credentialize and ensure that you've got the supply chain you want in real time. And this isn't just for organizations, this is also for people. So there's also an interesting way of you can minimize the amount of data that you have to persist in your system and you can get it on demand when you need it. So for example, a bank. I have a bank account. When I open up my bank account, I need to prove my address, mainly because residency purposes that they know I live in Dublin, in Ireland. After that, they don't necessarily need to keep it. The only time they need the address is when they want to send me a letter. So they can just ping me to check, can you share your latest address? Because I need to send you some correspondence. If this can happen seamlessly, transparently, very easily from my wallet, it's not a lot of work. It means I never have to go around notifying companies when I change my address. I never have to worry about notifying people when I change my credit card because they only hold the data and retrieve it when they need it, like in the streaming analogy. So there's a lot of power in that sort of model as well. And finally, the trust in business is imperative. It's actually really, really sad. 91% of business execs recognize that trust improves the bottom line. But actually, in one study we looked at, and this is not uncommon, in the consumer space, only 27% of consumers trust the companies that they do business with. About 65% of employees trust their employer. So these are not good numbers. So again, data transparency, it helps build and foster trust. So this is, again, the reason why we just think this is fundamentally so important. I would use the analogy that with social media, we talk about needing to educate our citizens about information and about recognizing I'm now scared now. So recognizing something isn't real, something isn't true. I think it's the same thing with data. We need to educate. We need every citizen to think about data as an important part of their life and not to think about it as the enemy, and recognize that data is what's going to drive our digital society. So I'm going to quickly end up with why the time to act is now. 3 things. One is the open standards are maturing. They're not perfect, but there's a lot of open standards that are being well adopted. We're seeing the governments are regulating. So we know in Europe, we have the eIDAS regulation, which is going to ensure by, I think, 2025, we're all going to be offered digital wallets by our governments with the options to have trusted government IDs and ideally have other types of IDs, other types of credentials in our wallet. And we're also, consumers are demanding, there's an increasing demand from consumers to have greater transparency, greater control on their own data. So call to action, and this is my last one. What I would suggest everybody do is be informed. Explore the standards. There's loads of websites, so I just put some keywords in there that you might want to think about. Look at what the standards are, so see how they're evolving. Learn about the regulations that are driving adoption. I think eIDAS is something anybody in Europe, you're going to really want to understand about eIDAS. And then join the open source community. There's really, really great open source communities in this area. Those are some terms you might want to think about. The other thing is I can't leave without calling out to my colleagues. There's 2 really good sessions later today. The next one is going to be on, again, decentralized digital identities, a primer and the current landscape, which is going to do a bit more of a deep dive into some of these details. And then the other one is how is the EU digital identity wallet going to impact your business? That's really talking about the eIDAS regulation, how that's going to impact you. And with that, I'm going to finish and I'll have that available for questions.
Thank you very much. So first question we have. When, in your opinion, a decentralized identity will be part of our day-to-day life?
So this is a very good question. I think it's going to come incrementally, and we may not even know that it's going to be there. So already, for example, in the US, we see a lot of states issuing MDLs, mobile driver's license, and we're seeing increasingly more and more capabilities coming into Apple Wallets and Google Wallets. So I think we're slowly starting to see more and more of this seep in. I just saw the latest Gartner hype cycle, and it believes that at least verifiable credentials is within 2 years of becoming mainstream. So we're seeing from the customers we're talking with, we're seeing use cases that are going to start being implemented within the next 6 to 12 months. And we're starting to see it becoming much more broadstream within the next 2 years. So this isn't something that is 5 years out. This is something we're already seeing the eIDAS as an example. The eIDAS is a decentralized identity ecosystem. We're seeing governments across Europe are already implementing this technology. So I think it's already here. It's probably going to be a couple of years out before it's part of all of our daily lives. But it should be here within the next 2 to 5 years. It's going to be part of all of our lives.
Thank you. Another question. Are there any protections in place for digital identity theft?
Sorry, apologies.
Are there any protections in place for digital identity theft?
So if I understand that correctly, this is so whoever asked this is a very controversial topic because there's no clear agreement. So what I'm going to tell you is my opinion, my personal opinion. When we look at these networks, everybody knows you need to have onboarding of issuer. You absolutely need the network to register, to do all the KYB for the issuer. So this is a trusted issuer. These are the types of credentials they can issue. There's a mixed opinion on the verifiers, whether or not the verifiers also need to be known, whether they need to be registered, whether they need to be onboarded. I personally believe they absolutely must have. And you have to have the verifier for a couple of reasons. And again, this is my opinion, but not everybody agrees. There's a couple of reasons why I think this is critical. First thing is that for protection purposes, what you don't want to have is you don't want to have any entity basically request information from your wallet, because as the wallet becomes packed with more and more valuable information, it could be the weak spot. You don't want to have any company be able to request information from you. That's the first. The second thing is, even if you know the company, you don't want that company to think that just because you have all this useful information in your wallet, that they have the right to ask. So for example, in the US, there's this a FICRA regulation. which one of the things is around the Fair Credit Act, but the other aspect it has, it also protects things like what information can an employer ask you for recruitment purposes. So the employer can ask you to prove your academic qualification. They can't ask you a lot of other things. So the other reason why it's really important, I believe, that things like verifiers, the receiving parties, the relying parties get onboarded, is because they need to understand what are the rules of engagement, what are they allowed to ask, what are they not allowed to ask, and there needs to be kind of a whole liability framework around that. So what I think is going to happen in the future is we're going to have managed networks. They're going to be open in the sense that anybody can join them, any company can join them, but they're going to be managed in that there's going to be rules of engagement. To join the network as an issuer, it means the following. To join it as a verifier, it means the following. So that's how I see. And then that allows things like these protections to be put in place.
Thank you. These are all nice positive aspects of decentralized ID if these data are in right hands. What are the ID's negative aspects if, for instance, government, company will use this data against the people?
Yeah, so I guess I would argue that the whole premise on this decentralized identity or self-sovereign identity model, and I should say, not everybody implements this. I mean, but if you implement it by the strict rules, the whole concept of this is the only person who has the data, aside from the person who had the data to start with. So the issuer, the data provider already has the data. So there's nothing in it for them. They already have the data today. What we're asking them to do is to release it to me, an individual. The upside of this model is that I totally control who then has access to it subsequently. So, for example, if a government issues me data, so in Ireland, the Health Service Executive is doing a lot of work around verifiable credentials, looking at issuing citizens with health cards and other health-related data. If my government issues me my conditions or my medications or my allergies, they issue me health data. If I subsequently share that with a third party, the government doesn't need to know. Today, in the centralized world, they would know, because the way it would be is I would self-attest information to a third party, an insurer as an example, and then the insurer will have to go back and verify that the data I tested was correct. So they'll ask me for an actual piece of leisure or something from the medical provider. So I would argue that decentralized identity actually aims, that's the fundamental idea, is it aims to stop tracking, because it stops this idea of the phone home scenario, where whenever I get a piece of data, I'm going to go phone home to the data source to make sure that it's valid. And once I phone home, that the data source can track it. They essentially are tracking me. So I guess I would argue that this aims to solve that issue. One thing I would say, that I've given a very positive story, let me give a kind of the downside. And this is not such a negative, this is going to be the challenges. For me, the biggest challenge about making this work is going to be two things. One is the trust networks. This all hinges on this concept of trust networks, that some entities have to stand up and those entities have to be trusted. Now, I would argue governments have the opportunity to take a role in standing up trust network. And we'll have to see how that evolves. But this trust network isn't just about public, it has to be public-private partnership. So one challenge, I think, is standing up the trust network. The other challenge is wallets, giving everybody access to wallets that give them the capabilities they need to have the utility for their data. And that's the other thing. We're seeing wallets starting to emerge. So we're seeing like the government, the IDAS wallet, within the next 12, 24 months, all citizens will get a wallet, and it will support the standard verifiable credentials protocols. So you can use it to start storing this data. And we're having conversations with private sector. So there's a lot of interest in things like banks, things like telecoms companies. So there could be other private sector wallets emerging. But that, to me, is the critical thing. Until we get these wallets into people's hands that give them the kind of agency and the utility they need, this is going to be challenging. So those are the two challenges I think we have in front of us.
I think we are running out of time. There are 3 more questions. So if anybody else would like to talk in a break, you can meet Mari in person.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.